Hi Math Soldiers, welcome to another boot camp. Today's video is going to be about introduction to absolute value. An absolute value is represented by two lines that look like parentheses, but they're actually straight lines. If I have an absolute value of a negative number, the answer is going to be positive. And if I have an absolute value of a positive number, the answer again is going to be positive. Why? What is an absolute value? An absolute value just tells you how far is a number from 0. If I have an absolute value of negative 1, what is that? So I'm going to draw a number line. I have 0 and I have negative 1. So the absolute value of negative 1 is just how far is negative 1 from 0. So negative 1 is far from 0 by 1. So the answer is just going to be 1. The same thing if I have an absolute value of positive 1. Again, I'm going to draw a number line. And I have 0 and positive 1. So the absolute value of positive 1 is just how far is 1 from 0. What is this distance here? So 1 is far from 0 by 1. So the answer is just 1. It's the same thing if we have the absolute value of negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, or positive 2, positive 3, positive 4. I have the rules right here. So an absolute value turns negative into a positive. And also, if you have an absolute value with many numbers and operations, you have to simplify to one number and then apply the rule. So let me do a problem. Problem 1. If I have an absolute value of negative 8 plus negative 3 minus 2. So how do I do this problem? So I'm going to work inside of the absolute value, simplify it to one number, and then apply the rule. So I have absolute value of negative 8. Now I have positive. You guys have to know that there's a 1 over here. So I have positive 1 times negative 3. What is that? Positive 1 times negative 3 is going to be negative 3 minus 2. If you guys have trouble on how to multiply, subtract, add, or divide numbers with same signs and different signs, you guys should go back to our lesson 1 where we explain everything in details. So now I have the absolute value of negative 8 minus 3, that's negative 11. I'm going to rewrite minus 2. So now I have the absolute value of negative 11 minus 2, that's going to be negative 13. So now what is the absolute value of negative 13? Let me draw the number line. So I have 0 and I have negative 13. So the absolute value of negative 13 is just how far is negative 13 from 0. Negative 13 is far from 0 by 13. So the answer is just positive 13. So the absolute value of negative 13 is just positive 13. So let me do another problem. Problem 2. So if I have the absolute value of negative 3 times positive 10 divided by negative 2. So again, I'm going to work inside of the absolute value. Now I have negative 3 times positive 10. That's going to be negative 30 divided by negative 2. What's negative 30 divided by negative 2? Is just positive 15. What is the absolute value of positive 15? Is just positive 15. In other words, how far is 15 from 0? 15 is far from 0 by 15. Now let me do another problem. Problem 3. Let's say I have negative absolute value of negative 8 minus negative 3. Again, I'm going to work inside of the absolute value. I have a negative, and inside of the absolute value I have negative 8. Now I have negative 1 times negative 3, that's going to be positive 3. Again, I have negative. Now I have negative 8 plus 3. That's going to be negative 5. So now how do I do this? You guys shouldn't get confused with this negative sign over here. This negative sign is outside of the absolute value, so that negative sign just stays there. I'm just going to rewrite it here. Now I have the absolute value of negative 5. The absolute value of negative 5 is just positive 5. So the answer is going to be negative 5. Now let me do another problem. Problem 4. If I have negative absolute value of negative 1 minus 3 minus negative 10. Let's work inside of the absolute value. This negative sign, I'm just going to rewrite it. I have negative 1 minus 3. Now again, I have a 1 here that we don't see. Now I have negative 1 times negative 10. What is that? Negative 1 times negative 10 is positive 10. So now I have negative 1 minus 3, that's negative 4. I'm going to rewrite plus 10. So now it's negative. Negative 4 plus 10 is just positive 6. So this negative sign over here, again, don't get confused, that's outside of the absolute value, so I'm just going to rewrite it. And now the absolute value of positive 6 is just positive 6. So the answer is going to be negative 6. Now let me do another problem. Problem 5. If I have negative of negative 3 times positive 3 times 2 divided by 9. So in this problem, again, I'm going to work inside of the absolute value. I have a negative sign outside of the absolute value. I'm going to leave it there. Now I have negative 3 times positive 3. That's going to be negative 9 times positive 2 divided by positive 9. Now again, I have a negative sign, and I have a negative 9 times positive 2 on top, which is going to be negative 18 divided by positive 9. I'm going to keep the negative sign here. I have negative 18 divided by 9, that's going to be negative 2. So now I have negative absolute value of negative 2. So this negative here, I'm just going to rewrite it. Now the absolute value of negative 2 is just positive 2. So the answer is going to be negative 2. So that was the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next boot camp. Don't forget to subscribe.